Welcome to the Crazy Wisdom podcast. I've got Bobby Healy here, and he is the CEO and co-founder of Mana Drone Delivery. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Stuart.
So you're got a drone delivery company. It's just so crazy because it's all happening so quickly. The last 2 years have been heavily dominated by AI and the sense that everything in software is going to change very quickly. But about 6 months ago, I started to do interviews on satellites, on space, on flying cars, and it seems just like it's all about to happen really quickly. But that's happened before, as you said. We were talking before the show that you were coding video games in 1984. And a lot of times people think things are going to happen when they don't actually happen. What's your take on all that?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, our industry, the drone delivery industry, is definitely guilty of making a lot of promises a long time ago. And still, there's a famous book, Where is my flying car? What happened to my flying car? And Peter Thiel said, we were promised flying cars and we got 140 character tweets instead. Um, and drone delivery, Jeff Bezos, made a statement nearly 15 years ago
Huh.
now on 60 Minutes. He did in presentation on 60 Minutes, say, hey, drone delivery's here. You're going to have it in every American home in 3 years.
Wow.
And here we are 15 years later, and a lot of promises made, nothing really delivered, excuse the pun. But there was no reason for that. I mean, the tech obviously wasn't really ready back then. Compute was difficult, battery was difficult. All the core components of a drone delivery system were just kind of leading edge back then and more expensive and less reliable as well. Whereas now we have the benefit of pretty much COTS components being industrial grade, industrial quality, industrial strength, not industrially safe,
Mm.
because we're flying large objects over people's heads. So
Mm.
it's a different level of safety and reliability you need there. But the basic building blocks of drones now are rather simple, and
Mm.
they are off the shelf. It's just a matter of orchestrating. But anyway, yeah, I mean, lots of promises, and there's still a lot of promises being made, particularly in the United States, which is 4 or 5 years behind where Europe is in drone delivery. And
Whoa,
that's a
wait,
big
wait.
surprise,
What?
folks. Yeah.
Oh, but is it because the FAA?
Yeah, well, I don't want to name names, but yes,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
a three-letter word beginning with an F. I know it's not. It's not. Look, U.S. airspace is far more complex than the
Wow.
rest of the world because everyone seems to have a plane or an airfield in the United States. So there's more traffic, more stakeholders. The FAA itself is a giant organization because of the federal system that exists there. So, you've one organization responsible for the busiest airspace on the planet, and it's a huge organization. Whereas the rest of the world, particularly the EU, where I am, is a bunch of markets that
Mm.
is relatively loosely coupled. It's certainly not federalized. And you have a common regulator that's only, what, 700 employees to the FAA's 35,000
Whoa.
that can do stuff more quickly, right? And you know what the EU loves to do is regulate things, and that's what we're good at. Our product is regulation. So in the case of drone delivery, regulation is what you need to kick off, right? To get going. It's not that it gets in the way. You can't do anything without it. So that's why I say the USA. I was probably a bit unfair, but it's definitely 2 to 3 years behind the rest of the world, maybe not 4 to 5. Now, an executive order from your new administration could come around the corner next week, and suddenly we're ready and we can start. Like, we have a base in Texas, we have a drone delivery operation in Texas. It's just the regulations aren't in a place where you could scale it efficiently and quickly.
Mm.
Um,
Could you do that
so
within Texas, or is it
no, it's
federal?
federal.
Okay.
Yeah, it's federal. So you couldn't now. Texas obviously very business friendly environment. That's why we're there. Like, the folks in government there, local government, really want to help and really make our lives easy. But you need airspace rules. I mean, airspace by its nature has to be federal. It
Yeah.
can't be local. So you need rules. I mean, another word for regulations is rules, right? And like, this is so incredibly boring to be talking about because it's not tech, and I'm a tech guy, but
Yeah.
you need rules to sort out how does everybody fly? How do we avoid, helicopters, army, civil aviation? How do they avoid us? What are the rules of engagement? And then you need those rules implemented in law. And then you need systems, traffic management systems, notification systems, network ID, remote ID, all these things so that we all see each other and we can all coordinate. And that just, the aviation industry is 100 years old in the US, and the
Uh,
US invented it pretty much. And that's its own worst enemy, right? Just like mobile telephony in Africa is better than most US mobile telephony systems. Same thing, right? So, yeah, I mean, US will get there, and that is our most exciting market. It's certainly our biggest potential opportunity is the US market. It's just what's going to happen several years behind Europe.
Brilliant. It's funny, maybe I'm just a boring person, but I find the rules and regulations thing extremely interesting because it does exactly what you just said, and this is giving me a whole new insight into
Yeah.
Europe as a regulator, as a product. There's a whole bunch of questions about how Europe functions in this in terms of, you had mentioned one
Yeah.
specific organization that regulates airspace, and you said it's 600 employees. I wonder how much the
Yeah.
EU, do you know how many people are employed in regulatory capacity in terms of the whole EU system?
It wouldn't be many. It wouldn't be many. There's a lot in government and central government in the
Yeah.
EU, and obviously each country has its own government because it's sovereign. So EU is a 100-year plan, right? So it's not going to EU, the center of Brussels where most of decision making happens. And in the case of the aviation regulator, it's in Cologne, but it's
Oh,
light touch. I mean, like I said, EASA, which is a huge responsibility as a regulator, is small. It's like a small agency. The AI regulator, I mean, that was 40 or 50
mhm.
people. They're responsible for European regulation. But I mean, if I compare those two things, the AI regulations, and I read them, while they're very good and they make a lot of sense, they really do. It'd be hard to fault them. It isn't the actual regulations that cause the problem for Europe with AI. It's the intent. It's the fact that they're regulating something that didn't need to be regulated at this early stage. And so Europe gets a bad rap, like GDPR as well, privacy, all that stuff. It gets a bad rap for trying to do the right thing. And it's able to do these things because it's so, and I'd say nimble wouldn't be the right word, but it's able to create regulations and laws quickly. And well, like I said, though, that usually gives it a bad rap. But in the case of drone delivery, you don't have an industry until you have regulations. So
Yeah,
we're thankful for that.
it's the specific thing that's being regulated that's really important. And I agree with you that the airspace is absolutely essential. One
Yeah.
conversation I was having a long time ago, probably like 5 months ago, just totally blew my mind, which is that there's all these levels. Like airspace is a completely known thing, right? We've known about airspace. We've mapped it all out in terms of our regulatory bodies because there's like different levels at which things fly and helicopters and drones. And now the drones added I have very little expertise in understanding the drone regulation in the United States, but my understanding is the
Yeah.
FAA has essentially shot itself in the foot because it hasn't regulated or no, it's
Yeah, it's not. No. It's not. I won't say it. FAA's created a gorgeous set of regulations called Part 108, and they're very similar to what we have in Europe now under the U-space regulation. So they're funny names, right? FAA loves to call things parts, part number, but Part 108 is what the USA needs. It's a very elegant, scalable approach to sharing the low altitude airspace, right? Um, so I give them a 10 out of 10 for the right approach, the right level of industry engagement. Companies like ourselves, Google, Amazon, have all worked with the FAA closely to help define these regulations and to connect each other up so that we can all compete with each other safely. I just think that because the USA is it's a much more complex airspace and a much busier airspace. The stakeholders that are to be considered the model airplane club, the hot air balloon club, whatever you want to say. They're all there a long time and they have rights to the sky, and so they have to be considered, right? Whereas, so the FAA have a tougher job managing that more
And
complex airspaces.
that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. Like in Europe, there aren't, I mean,
Oh, there's no airspace like in the USA. What you see in the rest of the world, like Europe's busy, but it's all like you see London Air, in the UK you've got Heathrow Airport and it's
yeah,
crazy busy, as busy as any airport. But the rest of the country is green fields and suburban landscape.
okay.
Whereas in the USA, there's an airstrip every, 10 seconds if you're driving along. So it's just everyone's got a plane in the United States. Even people that work for me have in LA have their own plane. It's just busier. And then the other, it's a natural law of large numbers. If you have an organization the size of FAA with the remit that they have to regulate many huge airlines, huge airports, and huge Boeing being there as well,
Mm.
you end up having 30,000 people, and just to switch the lights on for that many people is difficult. So it's hard to find where do you put something as crazy as the low altitude digital future of autonomous flying
Sure,
delivery. Where
sure.
does that sit in an organization? And the problem is it's forced into the FAA's lap because they own the skies and they coordinate everything
Yep,
else.
yep,
It's
yep.
just not, they're not digitally I won't say they're not digitally native. It's a regulator, it's an aviation, traditional safety focused regulator. And suddenly you've got flying robots that they have to deal with. So I wouldn't want to be unfair to them to say it's their fault. I would just say it's the confluence of the fact that the USA is the most difficult and complex airspace in the world. And it's a federal country, so there aren't local laws like there could be in local airspace management
Yeah,
like
I
there
got it.
is in
Yeah,
Europe.
yeah. Okay.
So yeah, I mean, but the result, right, is that here you have a little tiny Irish company that's doing more drone delivery flights a week than Amazon has ever done with its drone delivery program. And that's not because Amazon don't have a great product. They do. They have a great team, they have a great product, they've invested a ton of capital, but you can't fly because the environment isn't there.
Oh man, it's so interesting. There's so many avenues to go. One is just like the AI. So it's just where is governance going? Where is governance going? Because in the digital world, it's always been a sort of Wild West. The United States enabled a Wild West in the digital realm because we were in the 90s, we had this enlightened government that essentially said,
Yeah.
like, go for it. Like let's do this. Let's commercialize it, but commercialize it in a way that doesn't
Yeah.
change things. Now it's a different story. Now we have these large organizations that essentially dominate the internet traffic. Whether that continues to go on with AI, I think there's some open questions there, whether Facebook remains so dominant. Uh, but that's digital.
Yeah.
And what I love about what you're doing and where it's headed is that the digital and the physical are about to collide. And we've been talking
Yeah.
this new sort of intersection, which is just that in order for the digital and the physical collide, the government has to be involved for good reason because I come
Yeah.
from a bias of essentially like lower regulation just because I've sort of been red pilled by having to deal with the local construction things in my local area in the United States, which I think are not
Yeah.
just the United States. It's a Western wide thing of this sort of
Yeah.
decentralized regulation that gets in the way of everything. But
Yeah.
I'm not an anarcho-capitalist. I think that it is really important that we do have regulations. And so the airspace thing, can you kind of map out what airspace is, particularly in relationship to autonomous drone delivery, because that seems like it's going to be really big. But then also me flying in a car. I also want to fly in a car. Like flying cars will happen. What is that intersection between humans being delivered by autonomous systems and also
Yeah.
piloted systems? Because I believe the FAA has made regulation about piloted systems and autonomous systems. So they've given regulatory clarity in terms of EV tolls. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
what's going on all
Well,
that?
yes and no. I mean, they've given. the regulatory clarity is essentially that they have to be the same safety level as any other aircraft, which of course should be the case. So the bar that they've set is extremely high to carry humans.
Yeah.
And most folks and most media coverage, certainly, and even investors would be slightly guilty of underestimating how hard it is to build an aircraft to fly humans safely. It's one thing about losing a hamburger because your aircraft failed, and another thing about losing a person, right? So the timeline to build a type certified aircraft that can fly people is closer to 10 years than three,
Got it. Yeah.
and to get it regulated, possibly more. And it's in the billions of dollars of investment, not the tens of millions. So people have grossly underestimated how difficult it is to get a aircraft type certified. It's not hard to build a flying thing that carries a person. You could build that in a
Yeah. Okay.
weekend in
Yeah. Yeah.
a garden, right? But to do it in a way that an aviation regulator lets you fly that person for commercial purposes, it's a whole other story. And the Chinese have just certified a passenger flying autonomous aircraft. That's the first one ever. And they have an advantage that, the rest of
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
Western world doesn't have.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that they're taking more risk. I don't believe they are. I just think they can make decisions more quickly. The great thing about being an autocracy. Um, Whereas in the US, you have a rich, long tradition of safety that has led to the growth of the airline industry. And that's not going to be sidelined just because people are excited about flying electric vehicles. So that's one thing to think about. Those vehicles have to fit right in with standard aviation regulation on the safety of the equipment. Now, there's other factors, right? There's a thing called air risk and a thing called ground risk.
Mm.
Air risk is the risk of colliding with another object in the
Mm.
air. I'll address that one first. The way you deal with air risk traditionally is radar or ADS-B transponders and what's called controlled airspace. Controlled airspace is where there's a tower, everyone has to talk to the tower, everyone has to have a transponder, and it's, slow moving, easy to predict, not too many planes in the air, right? That doesn't work with the digital autonomous flying aircraft. It just doesn't work. So you need new rules for that. How do you manage them all? Generally, electric aircraft are flying lower, like 1,000 feet or less, and other aircraft are flying above. But ambulance helicopters, private planes, military, they're all conflicting. So you need to avoid each other. So that's going to take another decade. And who
Uh,
owns that? Who's responsible? All that stuff. So there's equipment risk, there's air risk, and then the final one is ground risk, which is more for the drone delivery business. Ground risk is what is the risk to people underneath, uninvolved people underneath, where we're flying 1 million flights a day in cities all over the world. What is the risk to anybody that's on the ground? And ground risk is kind of calculated through population density and all sorts of other rules and the equipment itself, the aircraft itself. So air risk, ground risk, vehicle risk. So I don't think you're going to be flying a electric autonomous aircraft in the United States in less than 5 to 10 years
mm.
still.
Mm.
Um, but I think they're going to be doing it in China and some parts of the Middle East. I
Mm.
won't be getting on those aircraft. I will not be climbing the one. I'll be waiting 20 years for that to mature and to be safe, you know.
It's so
Uh,
interesting because it's like a parallel, is the automobile. Is at what point did the automobile was just a tinkerer, tinkering in his garage until automobiles became safe. This is a really interesting question. I want to go research later.
Correct. And
Yeah.
it's on the other thing with an automobile is, or motorbike as well, it's okay, some guy gets into a car, drives and kills himself. Nobody cares. It's his business,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
His
Yeah.
family
Yeah.
care, but
Yeah. Yeah.
nobody else
Yeah.
cares because it doesn't affect them. But you get into a big airplane and it crashes and 150 people die. There's a lack of confidence in the entire industry
Yeah.
across every manufacturer, every airline, everybody. And so aviation is held to a much higher standard than automotive. Although the regulations do hold automotive to a high standard, you don't make headline news every time someone crashes a car.
That's true. Yeah.
But except unless you're, God, help them, but Uber with their autonomous car program, the
Yeah.
poor lady killed in Phoenix, nobody's fault, just a combination of things. Cruise with their incident in San Francisco, again, not really the tech's fault, but tech gets blamed, or at least the tech at the infancy is not expected to fail because everyone goes from I love this. I want this. Give me more to,
Mm,
you see what happened to that guy? I'm not going to touch this stuff. So it's just a different world. And we are definitely part of that crawl, walk, run mentality where drone delivery crawls first, then it gets a bit more ambitious and it
mm,
starts to, walk and at scale it's running. We're at the kind of walk stage on the way to running, but it's another I would expect at least another 5 years to 10 years before Mana, my company, is in every European city. It
mm,
won't be in 2 or 3 years because you just can't do something like this, even if you had unlimited capital and unlimited number of employees and engineers. There's a certain level of pace that is correct for an industry that is so important and so disruptive. And we're definitely pushing out we're in the lead. I think ourselves and Google with their drone delivery program.
Google has one. Wow.
Will be others, but it's right now it's us and them, I would think.
Wow. Okay. Um, so let's go into the drone part. It's autonomous. There's no piloted thing.
Yeah. Well, actually, the aviation word is automatic, not autonomous,
Aviation's
because
automatic. What does that
yeah, because there's a person in the loop. So we have a
mean?
remote pilot that
Yeah.
can manage 50, 100
Yeah.
aircraft, and that person can hit a button to fire a
Yeah.
parachute in our
Whoa.
case. Yeah, ballistic charge on the aircraft, and it's remotely controlled with two separate LTE connections, two SIM cards.
Whoa.
So the technical term is automatic, not it's a much more boring word, right, than autonomous. But the truth is there is a person that's responsible legally for monitoring aircraft, uh, so therefore it's automatic.
Okay. The but I imagine that autonomy, do you envision a world in which well, at what point does it all become autonomous? Like no human in the loop.
We are ready for that now, and so are our friends at Google.
Yeah.
There is really a reason that you have a pilot, practical reason. It's kind of a throwback to what I said about crawl, walk, run here
Yeah.
is we don't need right now to remove that person because it's cost effective. We're already profitable at the flight level. So we don't need to remove that person, and we're happy to have that person as a
Yeah.
form of oversight to continually monitor the tech over time. And we sometimes we learn stuff there, like people running and grabbing the delivery bag and throwing stuff at us, whatever. You don't technically need it, but we're happy to have it. And we'll probably, I would say, that'll go away reasonably soon. So think a couple of years,
Yeah.
maybe 3 years. You wouldn't need those remote pilots, but as I said, it doesn't slow us down in terms of the growth of the industry or the profitability of it. It still works really well, that equation.
And it's like the guy inside of the Waymo vehicle in the testing phase. I was just watching a video about the tech going on in China,
Yeah,
and there's a Chinese, company that's competing with Waymo that has engineers
yeah.
in all the different.
Oh yeah, I mean, and they're going to be. You can bet that they're going to be riding around in Waymos all the time, testing them and bring those ideas back to China. You know,
Interesting.
they're gonna and they're gonna do a great job. I mean, and I would expect electric Chinese cars to be just as good as Waymo cars. I don't think that um you can assume that China won't get there. But they are. I mean, Waymo have just done such a great job with their platform. So I think China will get there, but it's a while away. There's other companies, and one in the UK as well, Wave AI, that have done a super job. So I think you'll see a number of providers of that tech stack to automotive manufacturers everywhere, enabling everyone to be better and safer and just. So I don't think it'll be China or the USA. I think there'll be a number of them all around, and it'll come more and more down in cost. But I'm personally very excited about it. I even gave a TED talk on autonomous driving. I'm passionate about where that can bring us all, actually. Um, but it's not our parallel. I did an interview with Ben Thompson last month, and he drew a parallel to what we're doing for DoorDash. We've signed
Oh,
DoorDash as a
interesting.
partnership, so we're doing their deliveries. But he drew a parallel between Mana and DoorDash to Waymo and Uber, right? What Waymo could do for Uber, what we can do for DoorDash and Just Eat, we're working with as well. I think it's a good parallel. There's going to be elements of existing industries like mobility, transportation of people, transportation of goods that are disrupted in a positive way by a autonomous
Mhm.
technology that just takes massive cost out of the whole
Yeah,
stack
yeah,
and just
yeah.
makes the whole stack so much more efficient. And we're definitely that for logistics and delivery. We're not just food delivery, by the way. We deliver everything, but you think of it as if you could just move everything from A to B pretty much for free because the marginal cost of drone delivery is nearly zero.
Oh,
Um, what would you do, right? Well, what you would do is you would obviously fix the food delivery industry and make it better, faster, quicker, cheaper, whatever. But then you would start to look at medical transportation, high critical goods transportation. You'd look at everything that need to be moved, and you say, you know what? I can solve that now in an efficient, safe, scalable, economically viable way instead of the old way using the road. And you start to see, wow, it's a multiples of trillions of dollars of opportunity that we're just at the start of opening up.
and it leads to deflation, right? This is the same thing going on with AI LLMs. I've been on a track where I'm now building full applications, prototype
Same.
still,
Yeah.
but yeah,
Vibe coding.
vibe coding,
Yeah.
yeah, no,
Yeah.
and I don't know how to code. So down here in Buenos Aires, we invented a new one called Gaucho coding, which is you don't actually know
Okay.
how to code. You just build the applications using Claude
Well,
Code or whatever.
yeah, well, that's very interesting, right? So look at me, right? I'm programming since I'm 13 years
Yeah.
old, right? So
Uh-huh.
I'm programming 43 years.
Yeah.
Very strong programmer. I was always a strong programmer, but I was writing a ton of code and I still write code. Even today, I write a lot of code. But I only write code now because I'm vibe coding. So the LLM's doing most of the work. I use Cursor for writing code, and I'm knocking together apps in a couple of hours. I'll be doing it after this interview tonight before I go to bed, and I'll build something important for the company
Wow.
in a couple
Okay.
of and it would have taken me a month before to write that. And as I said, I'm a good programmer. You're not a programmer, but
Yeah.
that's you see what's happened here, right? AI has empowered everybody,
Yeah. Yeah.
people like
Yeah.
me to
Yeah.
go faster, people like you just to be able
Do
to
it.
build your own stuff.
Yeah.
So just imagine the impact of that on small businesses, small startups that have an idea, but they don't have a tech team. Well, they don't need a tech team now. So I'm incredibly optimistic and actually incredibly excited personally for my own future. And I'm a really old fart anyway. Like my life has gotten even more fun than it ever was because now I'm able to just vibe code and build stuff on a dime.
So
Um, yeah. Do
so
the same with logistics, right? Just
yeah.
so LLM for everything, but logistics also. Think about like the local bookstore that we power. Right? We got this small Irish bookstore suddenly is beating Amazon at delivering products to its customers. Like people will use this bookstore instead of Amazon because
Uh,
they're getting it in 3 minutes
immediately.
immediately.
Yeah.
Like our delivery time at that bookstore
Ooh.
from transaction to arrival in the back garden is 6 minutes. So we get the book, goes into the aircraft, flying at about 55 miles an hour. So logistics and scale is what makes scale is what makes Amazon work. Logistics is the product really they're selling, and logistics only works with scale because road delivery,
Until
you need
now.
trucks until now.
Yeah.
Exactly. So we've put logistics on the edge and
Ooh.
drop in capacity. In a car park with three car parking spaces, we can do 20 deliveries an hour from three car parking spaces, just
Ooh.
flying out of them.
Oh, that wait,
So
you're setting up in-car parking spaces? That's where.
I said, anyway, we're on the roof of restaurants, on the car park,
God.
anywhere. And we could deliver onto trampolines, onto the roofs of cars, wherever. It doesn't matter. A to B, safely, fast. And it's magic, by the way.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I more think about, okay, where will we be in 20 years when everything will be moved around by flying robots, mostly some ground-based robots, some underground robots, but mostly
Yeah. Yeah.
flying robots
Yeah.
because they're faster, there's nothing in the way. And what will that mean to retail? What will it mean to shopping malls? What will it mean to Amazon?
Mm.
Right? So local vendors have the goods there, local producers, the local bookstore, local hardware store, local cake shop, the lady that wants to make cakes at home and sell them. Anything. The gig economy producer of goods now has logistics, which means
Yeah.
that every physical offline business can be online because the robots will make them online.
So have there's a lot of questions I have follow-up questions. Like the one is there's the philosophical question about what deflation does both to our giant economies, because what deflation, like what you just described, is a deflationary environment if for logistics, so it makes the everything much cheaper. So there's a philosophical question about where that goes, but I actually want to understand more about if you've looked into Argentina as a place to do this. Have you looked into Argentina at all?
No, I haven't looked into anywhere. So outside in Latin America, we haven't gone
Mhm.
anywhere. Briefly looked at Mexico, and I visited Mexico simply because I spent 3 years there myself.
Hmm.
There's no reason, Latin America shouldn't have drone delivery. They will. But the big opportunity for everyone right now is United States.
Hmm.
But the immediate
Hmm.
opportunity is Europe. All the
Hmm.
other countries are particularly Argentina, but I was in the Middle East recently as well. I could go around the world and tell you that pretty much the whole world is Twin Peaks. There's European regulation and US regulation. And most of Latin America will be looking at the US model and adapting the US model. Most of the rest of the world, including China, Middle East, and so on, are adopting the international model, which is what Europe has implemented. The US is unique and going its own way with its own set of regs and standards. But Latin America, there's other places like Singapore, some parts of Southeast Asia that are modeling on the US model.
Uh,
But
But there really only are two form. Well, so there's the Chinese form, but they're not transparent. So it's like they just and they can just do whatever they want. So
yeah,
the
yeah,
European and the United States, in terms of regulatory frameworks which can be applied to the rest of the country, everybody just follows that. All right. The reason why I ask Argentina is because I'm in Argentina, and it would
yeah,
be. I was thinking actually, I live up on the 13th floor, and in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, I have to go down to let people out of the house if they come and visit me and such. And so
yeah,
there's no button that I can push. And so actually I had an
yeah,
idea
yeah.
about a month ago that I could just get a drone and get the keys from
Oh
them and
yeah.
drive it back up to
Well, a
where
drone, the best way for a drone is we would just stick it on the roof of the apartment block if you have roof access. That's so for large
I have.
apartments, we either put the product on the roof and if the customers have roof access, otherwise we just put it on the ground in communal delivery zones. So like just like if you pick up an Uber at a big airport, they'll offer you choices. And Latin America, Argentina in particular, has Glovo, it has Rappi, it's a bunch of
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
delivery operators
yeah.
there that are really looking forward to getting drone delivery, and we're really looking forward to being there. It's just, as I said,
They're waiting.
it's not yet the industry that's going to blitz scale and go everywhere. And I would say it's likely that there will be like I met a drone delivery company from Chile just last week
Okay.
actually,
Yep.
and there is a young startup team, techies that want to copy what Mana are doing, but in Chile. And so you'll probably see a regional business
Mm.
start up. There's a couple of Brazilian ones as well, actually. I haven't heard about anything in Argentina yet, but I'm sure I will. But I do think long term the industry will be either it'll consolidate in the end, or there won't be much fragmentation to start with. There'll be a handful of players, like a small handful of players, might be three, might be five, not much more that dominate the system worldwide. I don't think
Yeah.
because of the physical nature of it, there isn't really there's a strong advantage to the incumbent, whoever that is. Whoever's in the market first, physically there has a big advantage. So and the other thing is it takes a ton of capital to build a drone delivery business. So before you're viable, you're going to need hundreds of millions of dollars just to become a viable business that can operate without venture. So it isn't really the domain of the small guy. We're a bit unusual. You know, we've raised about just over $60 million and we're in Ireland, so our costs are low. But all the others have spent billions. I mean, if I looked at any of the other companies, if you
Oh,
Google on delivery, they've spent billions. And so it isn't, we don't have a right to exist because we're a startup and we're only 6 years old and we don't have the balance sheets of Amazon or Google. We've just done a good job, like any good startup, of getting there and scrapping and fighting and being one of the leaders. But I don't think you're going to see many of those. It's just too capital intensive.
you're describing a picture that seems eerily similar to Spotify.
Yeah,
And
that's correct. Bang on. That's a great example. Yeah, yeah, I'd agree with that.
it's
Very
like,
unusual.
yeah.
Startup came from nowhere, had no right to really no right to prevail, and but yet a monopoly, nearly a monopoly.
Yeah. And started in a similar situation, which is that the regulation in the United States in terms of music business was just too crazy.
Yeah,
There was no homegrown thing that could create it, although many, many, many people tried. And then Spotify in
yeah, yeah.
Sweden perfected
A
their
very
model.
special founder as
Yeah.
well in Daniel Ek. But I think that's a really good example of a case where there were no rules, there were no regulations, there was like such uncertainty. There was Napster,
Yeah.
illegal file sharing, toxic, everyone suing everyone, and then Spotify comes and absolutely, yeah, I mean, nailed it and had no right to win, but did. Yeah. I
So
think that, like, I don't think it'll be an Amazon or a Google that ultimately
wins.
will cross the finishing line as the winner, but it's possible that just because they're so gigantic anyway, that the tractor beam will come down and suck up everybody else and everything else. We want to remain independent. We want to grow forever and be bigger than them. So we're going to keep going for it. But I do think that ultimately, uh, there's not going to be more than a handful of dominant drone delivery operators.
Um, So I want to go back to the Argentina thing just because I'm here and they have a new regulatory environment here that is interesting because the person running the country is now an anarcho-capitalist. And so he wants, and Argentina has really, really bad
Yeah.
regulation. So they're
I forgot that term, anarcho-capitalist. Yeah.
yeah. It's quite interesting to be here during this time. But it feels
Yeah.
like there's an opportunity in Argentina specifically. Also in Brazil, you had mentioned there's a few Brazilian companies doing it, which makes sense because one of my previous guests is starting a flying car company, and he's
Yeah.
former Tesla, and he's gone and created a autonomous vehicle that looks like a UFO that's completely electric with 12 different engines and stuff like that. And he took all of his
Nice. Yeah.
learning from Tesla manufacturing to do it.
Yeah.
And so he's told me something really interesting, which I know from living in Brazil at various times, is that in Sao Paulo, they're interested in working with him because the Brazilians have a lot of helicopters running around because the
Yeah.
wealthy in Brazil all use helicopters. So the maybe not the regulatory environment, although probably that as well, but the actual usage of these types of vehicles is actually big enough where there's a market in Brazil. And so I
Oh,
wondered if
yeah.
Brazil might also make sense. But um, yeah, just there's it's interesting. I think Argentina might be an interesting place to do it. But I wonder about how noisy are these things and the airspace in which they live, is it something that's going to become an eyesore in cities?
Mm. So they're not noisy at all. The everyone knows drones, right? They usually will have seen a
Yeah,
DJI
yeah,
drone,
yeah.
the best consumer drones, which by their nature have small props, and small props spin far higher, so they produce very high frequencies, very angry, annoying frequencies for some folks. Our in most commercial or industrial grade aircraft like ours would have dedicated engineering specifically to make sure that noise wasn't an issue. And in our case, we make less noise than an electric car makes. You'll hear them when they're delivering, but you don't hear them when they're flying overhead. That's the first part. And we get out of the whole city of Dublin, we get one complaint a month
Mm,
about noise or privacy, one of those two. There's more concern about privacy
yeah.
than noise, believe it or not. And obviously we don't affect anyone's privacy. We don't record anything. There's no information we gather and so on. Then the other one is will the skies be a lot of folks come to us and say, "Oh, is this dystopian view where the skies are going to be clouded? I won't be able to see. There'll be no more birds. There'll be no more uninterrupted sky." Not the case at all. If you the way to think about it correctly is the airspace is three-dimensional. Firstly,
Mm,
it's it's a high bandwidth device, let's say. The drones at a cruising altitude of 200 feet are very high and very hard to see when they're cruising. Our average flight is just less than 6 minutes, so they're
mm,
not around for long. And you then think about, okay, how many times does a household get something delivered a month? And the number is one, right?
mm,
It's once a month.
mm,
That's generally the number, right? Across averages, different cities, different markets. So think one delivery per household per month. It's sparse. You're not going to be seeing like wherever we operate, people say, "Oh, I saw the drones. They're awesome." We get such positive feedback. And then if you look at the refer source, so we survey all our customers, so where did you hear about us? And they always say, I saw it flying. 75% of our refers, I saw it flying. But at the same time, if you go and walk around one of the cities we operate in and you watch people as we fly over, they don't look up.
yeah.
Nobody even notices, right? So I don't think that's going to be a concern at scale. It's
Mm.
not as concerned now, subscale, but I can see the patterns. I don't think it's going to be an issue.
And then is the flight path directly up to 200 feet, stays at 200 feet, and then directly down?
Exactly. Yeah. Because it's simpler. Simple is good in engineering because it's safer. We could take this complex, path, all sorts of things we could do, but straight up to whatever cruise
Uh,
altitude would be different depending on where we fly, but generally it's about 200 feet, straight up, straight across, straight down. And the reason mainly is there's never an obstacle at that cruise altitude. And if there
uh,
are, we identify it and block it off. Like, so there's some, of course, big radio antennas or whatever, big buildings. You generally want to fly in a straight line to be as efficient as possible. So pick a high cruise altitude. That way people don't notice when you're flying, so people aren't bothered by the flights, but also there's less stuff there. Simple logic.
so I'm just looking up how tall are most buildings in cities like Manhattan. So Manhattan,
Oh,
they're
very tall.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, the
they're
drone delivery is never going to Manhattan. It's a suburban, high density suburban
okay.
context. So think buildings of 12 floors, 12 stories to 20 stories tops.
The suburban to that makes puts what you just said into more context is the I'm in a dense city. I was thinking looking out into my beautiful park, but and when you were talking about the scale issues, I was like, oh, well, there's a bunch of people in my apartment building, so it might all be different, but the suburban nature of it changes a
I
lot
think
there.
apartment buildings will work so long as they're accessible from the top. But
Oh, interesting.
if they're like, so lots of countries, it's standard anywhere to have accessible rooftops, just
Hmm.
they're all
Hmm.
accessible.
Hmm.
But a lot they're not, it just depends. So any other urban context, and Manhattan that fit into this, there's just nowhere to put the product. There's
Yeah.
nowhere safe to put the product. So think of it for the first 5, 10 years, scaling all the suburbs and all the areas
Yeah.
around the city. So if you look at New York City, you're going to the Bronx, you're going to Queens, you're going all around New York, but you're just not going into Manhattan.
Okay, got it. And so yeah, Manhattan will, you'd mentioned, robots, ground robots. Manhattan will have ground robots. That's where the deliveries.
Right. And it'll also have tunnel robots too. There's a company,
Tunnel
Pipe
robots.
Dream, that has. There's a company doing this, like Pipe Dream. They're in Austin, I think,
Okay.
and they're doing systems to do underground networks of tubes to go inside buildings.
Whoa.
So Yeah, I know. And there's a marriage between the two companies where we deliver it to the roof and they bring it through the rest of the building. But all of that stuff is infrastructure. It'll take time. And that's fine. We're definitely up for that. Even the ground robots, there's a marriage between us and ground robots as well, where they might go into the restaurants to pick up products, bring them to us, and we fly them, for example. So there's going to be an evolution here. But for now, we can make a ton of money scaling just by flying from A to B.
Line to A to B. I interviewed the startup a long time ago, back in 2018. What were they called? I can't. It was started by two Bulgarian guys, and they were in Bulgaria, and they figured out a way to do drone delivery, but it was not within suburban. It was like across
Yeah,
country.
Dronamics, I'd say, is
Oh,
a
yeah,
company
that's
called
it.
Dronamics.
That's it. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I know them. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Well, it's what do we call it? Middle mile delivery.
yeah.
So they're delivering like a couple of 100 miles distance, but heavy cargo, big
Yeah.
cargo. So a really, really good use case and a good business and very viable, I think. Their challenge is it's obviously a much heavier aircraft because it's much bigger. So you get into this certification category that's really tough for ground risk. So their
Mhm.
regulatory timeline is much tougher than ours and their regulatory barrier. But I do think it's a really great industry, and Dronamics would be a leader in that space.
So let's go into that question of the philosophical implications of rapid deflation. Everybody's heard of Jevons paradox, particularly recently with LLMs. I forget what sparked it, but now I've even forgotten what Jevons paradox is. I think it's the more efficient you get, the more usage of the things actually happen.
Yeah, that's
Um,
it. Yeah.
and so we're entering into this world where it's going to be massive deflation, but then recognizing that most people are wrong about their ability to predict the future. And so
Yeah.
where does it go? Like, is it just going to be sort of luxury space communism? Is a term somebody gave me recently. Like if everything gets deflated, both in the physical world and in the digital world, where does that put society? What are we headed into?
Um, so there's two things that think about for a question like this. The first part is suburban and rural
Mm, mm,
living is at a
mm.
disadvantage to urban because it doesn't benefit from supply density and housing density. So there's things it can't have, and those things are meaningful. It's not just, oh, I can't get my hamburger. It's there are no
Medicine.
jobs in small businesses because it's just not viable. And Amazon are going to crush them all with a big fulfillment center or whatever. So I think about a rebalancing suburban and rural life with this infrastructure. And so democratizing that logistics part, enabling local job creation. So that's the first um, part of it. But then to the marginal cost of everything is zero and therefore, but it's not like all we're really doing is we're enabling commerce in a
Mm,
much more efficient way.
mm.
So that means there'll be a lot more commerce, there'll be a lot more consumption, there'll be a lot more jobs, and generally speaking, turbocharging an economy or creating consumption drives maybe some things to be lower cost, but the net effect is society gets more taxes, more hospitals get built, more health can be provided for the population. In the end, you need commerce and a strong economy, right? To pay taxes, therefore to subsidize the state and all of those important things, social services and so on. So I would relish a world where automation reduced a huge amount of friction and scaling problems with just doing basic commerce, such that basic commerce grew a lot more, and particularly non-urban commerce. So I can't see anything bad about in our case, we're not removing the cost or creating deflation per se. We're reducing the input cost into an existing industry. In our food delivery initially, it can be anything, but the result is probably, yes, lower cost for customers, but it resulting combination of greater consumption and wider variety and choice for folks. So I don't think there's much negative about it. You may look at the environmental aspect. If you were looking for um, potential concerns, well, what's the environmental footprint look like if consumption increases, right? I don't need that cup of coffee delivered because I'll have a glass of water or whatever. So that's a valid thing, right? But I think society's dealing with that anyway, with the growth of GDP and just the growth of populations, the electrification of things, the interneting of things, consumption's going anyway. So the world is dealing with that anyway, and it has to figure it out. And there's certain things like um, buying locally, transporting, manufacturing locally. All these things are bigger impact on the environment as consumption grows than we would ever be.
Hmm.
So I don't think there's much to be concerned about, but certainly you could write a book about it and still not have a conclusion.
Yeah. No, and I wasn't asking about deflation in the negative sense. I was actually like, I think it's going to get like I think I view it the same way as deflation in terms of the electricity parallel in the 1920s, where all of a sudden
Yeah.
it's like this magical power to light up our homes is
Oh
now in
yeah.
everybody's room. There will be, I do think there will be negative externalities, particularly the negative externalities in terms of the where warfare goes. Which might get
I actually think they'll be positive. I think they'll be positive because I think if Ukraine had had 10 million drones on their border 10 years ago, we wouldn't be where we are now. It would be mutually assured defense, right? So where we have mutually assured destruction now with nuclear, I think I would like to think that drones and that type of technology could protect a country and a border so well that it's not worth the while of anyone to attack them. So you see missile defense shields over Tel Aviv, for
Mm,
example, too expensive for everyone to have, right? It's just not viable. Israel is lucky that the US back it to have that. Ukraine couldn't afford it. Europe couldn't even afford that. That cost won't come down quickly enough. But drone technology and high manufacturing output of defensive drones on borders would stop Putin in his tracks.
that's
And
really
so I
yeah.
think it's a good thing.
It's like moving. It's a good question of essentially whether mutually assured destruction translates, or sorry, whether the game theory of mutually assured destruction from nuclear power translates over into mutually assured defense with drones.
Well,
And
it's guaranteed destruction to an
mm,
attacker,
mm,
is
mm,
what I would say.
mm.
So
Even if they're
if
armed
you're
with drones.
kind of invading, right, and you're rolling, 1,000 tanks up and 300,000 troops up, if you're certain that they're all going to die and be destroyed,
Uh,
maybe you're not politically, maybe it's not a smart move. Like if Finland has 5 million attack drones on its border, it doesn't need to use them. It just needs to show everyone that they're there and no one's going to cross the Finnish border. So I
hmm,
think in less than 10 years, I mean, Ukraine are producing a gigantic amount of drones now, but it's just too late for them. But I think over the next 5 to 10 years, any modern economy
hmm,
is going to be
hmm.
independently manufacturing defensive
Oh,
drones.
interesting.
For sure, there's offensive ones, of course there are, and that's not pretty. Like Anduril, for example, building things to kill people, and that's their job, right?
Yeah,
That's what they do. They're an arms company.
yeah.
But there's another way to look at it, which is the way I look at it, and I would love to be part of it, is building technology that makes it impossible to invade a country.
Hmm. That's interesting. That's a whole new thought. So I have one more question. Uh, oh man, it's like I had a great question about where we're headed.
AI could remember your question for you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I just turned on my. I've been building all these applications, and the application that I built is an automatic transcription thing, and I just turned it on so that afterwards this will.
Very cool. What language did you write it in?
So well, I got AI to write it in Python. That specific one in
Yeah.
Python, but
Yeah.
now I've also
Okay, if
got
you don't tell AI what language to use, it'll nearly always use Python because there's so many applications that it can learn from out there and so many connectors and stuff. Python's a crap language. You should try and switch to, well,
Which
I'm
one?
writing lots of JavaScript now, but like
Okay.
real heroes use C++ now.
C++. And does the LLM have enough to write in
Oh
C++?
yeah, yeah. The thing is, LLM has gone beyond just copying stuff from Stack Exchange and replicating
Yeah.
it. It now knows how to code. So it can every language it knows. So I could give it code in Python. I could say rewrite that for me in JavaScript, and it'll do it. So
Okay.
it's coming back to the primitives of the kind of structures and functions and ways that you use code to do things. So it can do any language.
So, okay, I'll change my last question. What the next thing that you're going to build after you get off this call? What is it? And you don't have to share if it's proprietary, but what is the business function of it? Like, how is it going to help the business?
Tonight, yeah. So t tonight, no, it's a quite a boring thing. I'm happy to talk about it, but it's an important thing. So we've rolled out to a new city, right in Finland, and in Finland, there's in the cities, everyone's got a forest in their garden, right? So it's very complex environment. So our sensitivities to where we deliver, it's just more sensitive because trees bad, right? You can hit
Yeah.
a tree, and worse still is trees swing in the wind and they have wind shear coming off them. There's all sorts of things, right? So it's just more complex. So I'm building a little tool to let our ground team evaluate the environment of a given garden and give them a risk score and give them recommendations for that. And I'll do it all tonight in a few hours.
And so how does that actually work? Are you going to do, is it 3D modeling? Do you need to do some sort of 3D
Yeah,
model?
we have point cloud. We have photogrammetry, which we turn into a point cloud. So we have a point cloud of the entire city, and so
Point
we
cloud.
we layer that with imagery. And so they'll say, look, here's the place I want to deliver, and my code, if I get it working, will just look at the point cloud and they'll say, here's all the flat areas, here's flat areas that are grass, here's flat areas that are not grass, here, whatever. It'll assess based on various factors where the best location is to drop the product. And it'll also factor in nearby trees and tall buildings to calculate wind shear safety distance. Wind shear off big objects is a factor for small flying aircraft. All of that. Well, I probably won't get it finished tonight, but it's a kind of a day or 2 day job probably to get that working, and it would have been months in before.
And are you hiring coders still? How has it changed your
Yeah, of
ability?
course. We don't we just do much more with the
Yeah.
same number of coders. We'll still you still need coders for deep tech. We're a deep tech solution.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
need architects that, an architect or a system engineer is someone that they're not just coding. They may not even be writing much code. They're designing the whole system and how it works together. And there's a lot more to coding than code.
And
Um,
if this is what I just tweeted earlier today, which is that I don't think that coding functions is a skill people want to learn anymore, just given the fact that I can get Claude Code, particularly Claude Code, to do
it,
things pretty
it,
flawlessly.
Yeah, it's funny. So I use Cursor, not
Yeah.
Claude Code. I actually don't know the answer to where this goes because what I'll tell you is vibe coding, right? Vibe coding is the term now that kind of, yeah, Andre Karpathy invented it, and it's kind of everyone. It's a good word for it, where someone a great coder or a brand new coder is just writing a ton of code, and that code right now is beautiful code, but it's not
Mm,
efficient
mm,
necessarily. It's
mm.
unwieldy. You end up with 10,000 lines of code that should be 1,000 lines.
Yeah.
And a novice programmer doesn't know what to do with that. They don't understand it. They don't understand scaling efficient systems and how systems interact and good, elegant architecture. So I'm not sure. Well, certainly the tools today, neither, Claude nor Cursor that I use across all the LLMs, none of them are good enough to let them design your system. But I do think that you don't need AGI for that either. I do think there's going to be an iteration that's going to come that it will probably go pretty close to that for most business needs that you won't need it. But for a stack like ours, where you've got a drone that's flying and you've got a C++ flight control stack that's talking to Python on board, that's talking to Java in the sky and JavaScript in the
Whoa.
app and stuff. All that stuff, that intricate network and web of interdependent systems, you can't just code that. It's much more than that. You're thinking about bandwidth and throttling and network
Yeah.
constraints and all sorts of stuff. So you're always going to need really deeply experienced computer engineers across the disciplines.
Yeah.
They're always going to need to be there. It's just all the small startups and the passion projects can be implemented quickly and for free. And your minimum viable product can actually be a functional, sellable product. And I think that's a great thing. Like as a programmer, you might say, I'm now a dinosaur, I'm no longer needed, but it's not true. In the end, if I was investing in a company, I would still want to see a tech co-founder in the company.
Yeah.
I think it's going to
Because
be still.
because of that architecture question, it's like my blocker now is not the code, it's the how does the code fit together into a full solution that works, basically.
Yeah, correct. And but you can get a bit of help on that, and I think the AI will go a long way towards doing that as well. Look, I'm not saying in any way, I'm in the opposite. I'm one of the biggest proponents of replacing the programmer. I do think that's going to happen. I don't think you're going to need programmers at the volume that they're needed before. But I still think that you still need an architect and a CTO that plans and, knows about scaling for a scalable system, right? So if we're going to be flying a million
Yeah.
flying robots, it isn't the code that's important. The code is one of the tasks in making all that happen, but the design behind it, the operation, the architecture, that has to be conceived with a human brain that understands
Yeah.
these things. And AGI are LLMs are certainly not there yet. If you believe AGI is happening, then you also believe that you won't need the CTO anymore, the CIO, any of those things. And I do believe AGI is coming. I just couldn't tell you when.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. How can people find out more about you and your business?
Follow me on Twitter, real Bobby Healy, or go to mana.aero. Even better, you'll see the way we work. There's videos up there that show you what a drone delivery looks like. Mana.aero, AERO, mana drone delivery, if you want to Google us.
And any
And or come to Dublin or Finland or Texas to see us in action.
any roles that you're hiring for that you want to get out?
Programmers, after all, after everything we just said, you can. I've never stopped looking for great engineers, electrical, mechanical, aerospace, software, you name it. I can't get enough of them.
Cool.
And across every discipline of engineering, I'm interested. So do reach out. LinkedIn as well is good for that. Well, I'd
Cool.
love to talk.
Thank you so much.